G'day everyone, welcome to Talking Leadership. This is Eric Perez, your podcast host, welcoming you back to our ongoing series around this thing called leadership. Thank you for joining me again. Today's guest is the founder and director of Lawganised. Can I welcome to the podcast Ben Deverson? Thank you for joining me on the podcast. Your leadership, mate, what was its beginnings, and can you tell me a bit about why you find leadership to be an important part of the world of work?
A little bit about my background. I guess, as a teenager, I always found that sort of school got in the way of my sporting prowess or attempted prowess, I should say. And I guess whenever I played in those sporting teams, I tended to sort of drift towards the leadership roles of, be it mentor or coach, with my colleagues, but eventually that sort of led into finding myself as captain of cricket and football teams. So I guess it just sort of fell naturally, but I guess the real test was when I joined the army, and that was as a very fresh-faced, in fact, pimple-faced 18-year-old when I went to the Royal Military College, which I guess it is designed primarily as a leadership and management college, albeit in the military context. So, when you're there for 18 months, you really are thrown the deep end of leadership and management training, but it's nothing that compares to the role you get after you graduate as a commissioned officer. And I was 20 years old, and I was an army lieutenant and put in charge of what was called a troop or a platoon of soldiers. And my first role had 37 soldiers. So when you're a 20-year-old, all of a sudden thrust into the role of leading and managing 37 people, it's not easy. And I knew that I did not know my job. So I sought out experienced people. I always sort of looked at that key piece of surrounding yourself with good people. So I sought out my very experienced senior non-commissioned officers who had served sort of 20, 25 years, Eric. And I have a very vivid memory, and I would call it a fond memory, of my troop sergeant, who to this day is a very, very good friend of mine. He was a Special Forces commando, been around for 20 odd years. And I just said to him, his name was Fitzy, and if he's listening to this podcast, Fitzy, this is all about you. I just said to him, mate, I need your help. I do not know this job and I need your help. And he just said back to me, boss, don't worry, you look after me, I'll look after you. And that was 25 years ago. And I still consider him a friend. So I think the key message out of that, Eric, is if you surround yourself with good people, you can't really go wrong. But I think the other key thing I just want to add in there is what I did is I probably showed my vulnerability. And I believe that that's a good skill for a leader to have, that we're not all these superhuman beings that are always in charge and always got everything under control. I believe showing your vulnerability is a good thing.
So thank you for sharing that, Ben. So I've had a lot of podcast guests that have had a start in the military. So I guess I think this is a really good segue into the next theme. That have you found distinctions between the leadership and management function, and has that been influenced in some ways between what you saw as leadership and management from a military perspective?
Look, I believe the two concepts are effectively polar opposites. I see leadership more about being an influencer, being a visionary, and offering a service to the people that you're leading. And that is two ways. One is to set the standard, but the other one is to ensure that people that looking at you are actually convinced they're stronger than what they actually are. And that's a bit of a Stephen Covey comment, I think. And I think management really is more about managing the resources that you have available to you. And that is more than just people. I think management is about putting not only the people, but the physical resources you've got available to you to achieve a goal. An example in the military context is that in my world, I was a communications officer, so I had communications assets at my disposal. You're not effectively leading a telecommunications asset. You are deploying a resource. So I think that the management of those resources is what I would consider a management aspect. But I think leadership is very much around, setting the standard and serving your people. I sort of believe wholeheartedly that when you're leading others, you are serving them. They're not serving you. If you think the other way, then I think that your view of leadership probably needs to be reconsidered.
Yeah, that's I've had many leaders that have had that the other way view of the world, and they exist. And look, I think it's a whole spectrum of effective and not so effective leaders in that respect. So yeah, fully understand where you're coming from. Now, The next theme, and this one is always an interesting one to me, and it's becoming more interesting around this idea that leadership is it's a lonely road, it's a lonely pathway, however you want to phrase it. Some have suggested to me on these podcasts that it's as lonely as you want to make it. Some have said that there are some aspects of leadership that will require you to make a decision on your own and essentially take all of the facts and figures and issues and emotions of that decision and just make the call, good or bad. So from your perspective, Ben, what do you make of that statement? Is it a lonely road, or is it as lonely as you care to make it?
Look, I think it would be the latter. If you want to be lonely, you probably will be. And I think there's probably a bit of emotional intelligence here. That's the old saying. If you want to go to a party and you believe it's going to be a boring party before you get there, it's probably going to be boring. So in terms of lonely, I guess I go back to that point around surrounding yourself with good people, because in my book, the concept of leadership doesn't exist unless you've got followers. It simply doesn't happen otherwise. You can't lead yourself. So I think if you are a collaborative leader, then you have followers who are looking to you for that standard, looking to you for that sort of inspiration. But equally, I expect from my people in the past that they contribute to the decision making. Now, I believe that a leader has to make decisions, and they can be have a lonely existence, because you have to assess the risk. But I think the key thing is you make a decision, and if you can empower your people to assist you with that, and that's by providing you options, giving you the research and data that supports decision making, and if they're part of it and you're collaborative enough, then I don't think you'll have a lonely road. I've often been accused, particularly in my military career, of being too close to my people, and I did find that a bit of a challenge in the military context. I have a view as a leader that I like to get to know the people that I work with quite closely, not in an appropriate fashion, don't get me wrong, but I want to know what makes them tick. I want to know what makes them get up in the morning and what are the key important assets of their life, their children, their family, whatever. Because when you know that level of detail, I think you can lead more appropriately. People who serve in the Defence Forces are required effectively by law to respect rank, but that doesn't necessarily translate into respecting the people who wear that rank. Now, I sort of held a view in my time in the military, but equally my time since, that a leader should not have to give orders unless the building is on fire, or even in the military context, you're under fire. People should follow direction, but I don't believe, and I never, even in my 8 years serving in the military, I don't believe I ever gave a formal order. I believe that, a formal order is quite an interesting concept. I think, people who, and I certainly didn't serve at an operational area. I missed that opportunity. However, there would be times when my colleagues would absolutely have given orders, particularly when it came to the saving of lives. But I'm not a big person on giving orders. I think if you need to get your people out of a burning building, you say, get the hell down, let's get out and follow our instructions to get out of the building. Now, that would probably be conceived as an order, but my view about leadership is a little bit more collaborative and working on collective solutions together.
That's come across in your responses, and it seems, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, that the people that you work with or have worked for, that matters to you. That relationship building matters, and that's a good thing to hear, because for some people, when you get into a role, the expectation is that there's a respect for the position, and whether or not that brings respect for the person sometimes really doesn't matter to some people. I'm more of the camp in your thinking, in that I would like to earn people's respect and trust, but that requires some give and take. Yet there are some who go completely the other way, and there's always a bit of a blurry line there about how connected do you get. But that I think depends on it can depend on the industry sector too. I would assume that in some professions where you are expected to work on your own solidly, and there are an organisation relying on your expertise, let's say an accountant who's got the numbers and is in a room and is just out there crunching those numbers, that the degree of their capacity to network and engage with people is not a core requirement of what they do. But if you're in the world of, say, the legal profession, which your firm works in, the people element is the most critical element of the work that you do, not the other way around. So
Correct.
I think it can be. I think it can be context specific. But let me ask you this, and I think I know where you're going to go with this, but I'll be surprised if you throw a curveball at me. Measuring success, mate, that looks different for different people. I guess that one of them will be how good you develop your staff is one that might matter to you. The loyalty of your people, maybe, but what is it for you, Ben? What does success look like for you?
I'll go back to that point about, I believe leaders are serving the people that they are leading. And that's an open-ended statement. But the question I would ask anyone who is working for me is, what can I do today to make your life easier? Do you need a decision made? Do you need resources allocated? Do you need more money to get something done? So I think the overall piece there is, from a leader's perspective, who am I developing and who is going to replace me? If a leader can look around and say, my job here is to make myself redundant by developing the expertise, the skills, the leadership skills, particularly of people that work for you, I think that is a measure of success. The old saying, if Eric gets hit by a bus, who's going to take over the podcast? I guess it's a military thing as well. We were always trained one level above. So if the person who you're working for happens to get, let's just say, killed, you can step up. You're always trained one level above. Now, that's a very formal military context, particularly around the training that we receive. And that's sometimes very, very challenging in the commercial corporate world. But I always try to ensure that people are empowered to sort of think above the levels that they're in. And I encourage people to make decisions, because if they make a mistake, they learn from it.
Do you have a golden 5 or top 5 or key capabilities that you think an effective leader needs to have?
Well, look, I actually subscribe to what I call the 4 simple rules of leadership, and it's something that a former CEO I worked with championed, and I actually have literally written it in my LinkedIn profile. And the rule number one, you've got to have fun. You've got to create an environment that is enjoyable. We are in this place a third of our lives. You've got to have some fun. Number 2, if we have a meeting, we have to have a decision in that meeting. No meetings for no purpose. Number 3, if that decision, or in fact, if any decision is wrong, just change it. No dwelling, no blame game, just change it and get on with it. And number 4 is, everyone in the room knows more than me, and I have to suck that information out. So they're just rules. Now, you talked about capabilities, Eric, and I think that going back to that key point, I've emphasised it a fair bit. Leadership's not a right, it's a service. And I come, into my leadership roles with an idea of developing the people in the team. That's the role, that's the service I offer. And in doing so, I think the other capability you need is to have empathy and compassion for people and get to know who they are, understand what makes them tick. And you need to have, therefore, a very strong interest in other people. The other thing I think you need to have a capability to do is to make a decision. And again, it might be wrong, but a leader who is decisive is, I tend to find, having taken the appropriate information in, the leader who makes a decisive decision and moves forward and tries to use his team, her team, to execute that, far better than the one who sits there and flails around, doesn't make decisions. People often say to me, I wish this guy would just make a decision.
Mate, the reason I laugh, and sorry for interrupting, but
that's all good.
It's like you and one of my previous podcast guests, Nick Dorr, sing from the same hymn sheet, because he said exactly the same thing about making a decision, that you're going to have imperfect information, just make a bloody decision, and then wear the consequences after making that decision. Now, I think part of what he was saying, without actually saying out loud, and again, you've got to dig into why he would say something like that, and I think this would apply to you, but again, correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't know every damn thing, but that I think if you trust in the professional nature of the people that you work with, and in the legal context, and more power to the lawyers and solicitors that are listening, that you guys and girls are trained professionally, and you're trained to make decisions based on a set of facts and information that you've got. And I think in the cold light of day, you can only make a call based on that stuff, but you need to make a call at some point. And that, I think that's important, especially in the legal context now. In the world that I work in advocacy, industry advocacy, it's kind of the same thing, but in the role of the CEO that I work in, I have to moderate my decisions a little bit, not just a little bit, significantly, because I take instructions from a board. So the board have the same strategic outlook that I do, or I hope they do. And when I'm coming to a decision, I tell them what my thought process is, and they're now doing the same with me, so that you kind of create a sync into how you get to making that decision. And then once you've considered as many of the issues, factors, variables, whatever you want to call them, then you make a call, and then you have to be able to defend your call, not to the degree that you're defending yourself personally, but you can only do what you can do. If we had an ability to make perfect decisions, I'd be running that business now, and I'd have work forever. Because people would say, "How do I make the perfect decision?" There is no such thing. I don't think there is.
And someone who knows Nick, and someone who I respect enormously, I'm glad that we share that view, because you're right. Like, the decisions you make are often with information that is either old, questionable, but you've got to make a decision, because the risk of doing nothing is worse than the risk of making the wrong call.
Correct.
You know?
Correct.
And I always think back to an amazing interview that was done with Michael Schumacher after a practice session, where I believe he crashed on a relatively simple corner. And the reporter asked him, aren't you ashamed of yourself? Why did you crash on a corner? No one crashes there. And Michael Schumacher's response was just perfect. He said, well, at least I now know how fast I can take that corner. That's all he took from that event, is that he learnt from it. And I know, and I have made some absolute clanger decisions in my career, but I made them with the best information. And I'm the first to say, look, guys, this was wrong. Let's wind it back and start again. We may have, burnt some time or lost some money or invested some things we shouldn't have, but you got to stick your hand in there and say, guys, I screwed this one up. I need a bit of help to fix it up, show the vulnerability, and just get on with it. There's no point saying, no, Eric, you really stuffed this one up, mate, and you got to really take a pill and, go home. And, the blame game, it just doesn't get anyone anywhere. Yeah, draw a line in the sand, cut it, and move on.
Yeah, agreed. Very much agree. All right, let's move into the nature versus nurture theme. Are leaders born or made in your estimation, Ben?
Oh God, this is an age-old debate, isn't it? Look, I don't think you can ever say leaders are born. I think we are a product of the people who have influenced our lives. I mentioned a very trusted colleague earlier, my first troop sergeant, who taught me an enormous amount about leadership. In probably my most formative years as a leader of people. And I think about him and many other people that I try to emulate, and equally people who I look at and say, I would not be like that. So I think that the leadership skills that you develop, or the title of leader, is afforded to people who are a product of others. I don't think leaders are born. I think they're made. That's my view.
Yeah, look, I often say on these podcasts, I move between one and the other, but I've spoken to enough people now that I could fall into the camp that a really good leader can be made over time. And that to me is a critical part of that nature versus nurture, is how much time are you spending around people that can become templates for what good leadership might look like. So in your formative years, and I mean when you're a kid and you see the dynamics playing out in your house, how do your parents interact? How do they make decisions? How do they include you in a decision as you're growing up? Then you get to go to school, you get to be around groups, you're around friendship groups, you see teachers interacting. Like there are reference points for this as you grow up, and some people are more attuned to that than others, but it doesn't mean just because the person who's not attuned to it can't learn that down the track. And then at the point where you're in the world of work, I guess it comes back to that thing I was talking about before, that This one for me is a really important one, in that in your travels, you will meet people that aren't at work for anything other than to make a paycheck and go home.
Yep.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but you're also going to meet people in your travels that are there to work for professional development, for fulfillment, for whatever other reason. And being able to understand that in people gets you a long way to having a functional workspace, whatever that looks like. Do you agree, disagree, have a different view?
I think I share the view primarily. I think the thing that I think about there is there's an amazing book that I actually recently reread, which is Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich. Now, I'm not particularly interested in the financial element of it, but there is a really good 3-letter acronym in that book that talks about, it's called, the acronym is QQS, and it stands for quality, quantity, and the funny piece is the S stands for spirit. And Napoleon Hill's view in the QQS formula is that spirit totally outweighs quantity and quality. And I 100% subscribe to following someone else or being inspired by someone else about the spirit that they actually have about them. Now, getting back to your point, I think that if you apply that theory across many people and the spirit that they share with you and the influence they have and those sort of things, I think about them more than I think about the quality and quantity they brought to the table. Now, and I think about the ability for them to inspire me and then my desire to be like that in the future. I don't think about the work they literally put on the table. So I really do subscribe to that theory that it's probably, that, as I said, soul, their spirit, and how they, and I think that spirit definition is how you interact, how you engage with people, and what impression you leave with them. Do they leave in a better state of mind in your interaction, or do they leave in a negative state of mind? I like to think that people should leave an interaction with me in a positive state of mind. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question there.
No, you have. I guess it's an extension of what I was talking about, and it's interesting about the S in that acronym, that spirit. Did I hear you correct? You said spirit?
I'd said spirit, absolutely. QQS.
Yeah, and that makes sense to me. I mean, it can be context specific, it can be person specific, because everyone I've met in my travels, in my own jobs, as I've gone through the different career paths that I've gone through, I remember every one of the people I've worked with, and they've all had something I could take away and go, yeah, that makes sense, or I like the way that they tackle that. And there's some things I haven't liked from some leaders, and I've had some very toxic leaders to some very good leaders, and I think I learned from both. But I tend to learn more from the toxic ones, because you learn about the things that you shouldn't do to make you a more effective individual, let alone a better human being. Because like you said, we spend a lot of time at work, and it matters that you like the people, or at least can respect the people around you, because you don't want to go to work every day thinking you don't want to be there. That's I think,
and it goes back to that point I made about getting to know your staff or your people. If you know them really well, you know how to lead them. Some people need a little bit more direction. Some people would loathe too much direction. And if you know that about your people, and you were to work on an issue or a problem together and decide upon a course of action, person A, I might just go, okay, I need you to deliver that. Are you good? Do you have what you need? And they just go ahead and do it. Another person might say, I need to check in with you every 10 minutes. So I would say to them, so come and see me this afternoon, let me know how you're going. if you need me at all, just give me a buzz. I'll take your call. You know, those people might need a bit more hand holding. So if you know the people, you can ensure, again, that service piece, you deliver to them what they need.
Sure. Ben, the last theme is about taking a bit of a retrospective look at your career pathway. And I'll ask this in this way. What would you say to a younger version of Ben Deverson about what makes for an effective leader, if you could do that? Provide advice to a younger version of yourself.
Oh, gee, that's a really good question. So I guess what's interesting about my career and a lot of my colleagues who went through the Royal Military College and the Defence Force Academy would be in similar boats. Professionally, I've always been in leadership roles. I sort of don't know what it's like not to be in a leadership role professionally. And I think if I was to give advice to myself, I would probably echo a lot of the comments I've made tonight. Don't get me wrong, I wouldn't have said the things I've spoken to you tonight about Eric 25 years ago, because I certainly didn't know them. So I think the advice that I would have to a younger version of me is, if you want to develop as a leader, you've got to be an absolute sponge, and you've got to absorb the good stuff from the great leaders, and you've got to acknowledge the bad stuff from the not so good leaders and develop your path. The other thing as well is, and I probably lean towards the focus on relationships, but the decision to make a decision is more important than being the friend. And I think people respect you more for making a call and backing yourself on it, and then being willing to execute it, rather than trying to make the decision in everybody's best interest. Because invariably, when you've got black or white, or red or black, or whatever you need to do, one decision versus the other, sometimes you're going to annoy some people, and you just got to accept that. You're not going to be everyone's friend all the time. So that would probably be another piece of advice I'd give myself.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah.
Ben, on that very positive note, I will end the podcast. Thank you for your time, mate. And for those listening, I've been speaking with Ben Deverson. He is the founder and director of Lawganised. Thank you for your time, mate.
Thanks, Eric. Really appreciate it. And hopefully your listeners got something out of it.
It was a great discussion. Thank you, mate. And for those listening, this has been Talking Leadership. I will catch you all on the next podcast.